Welcome to Reels on the Rocks, the show where your hosts Whiskey and Sweet Tea discuss film from the unpretentious perspective. Pack your hiking boots and your sleeping bags, listeners, because it's summer camp month. And on this Friday the 13th, we gather around the campfire to talk over Sean S. Cunningham's Friday the 13th. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell. And as always, please be advised, spoilers are ahead.
Welcome back, campers. It's us, your trusty camp counselors, Whiskey and Sweet Tea. Today we'll be talking about Friday the 13th, and hopefully it should actually be uploaded on Friday the 13th.
And I promise we won't ignore you by having loud sex in the next room.
No, we do not want to be murdered.
We don't want to be murdered.
So obviously the reason I picked this one is because I noticed that there was a Friday the 13th coming up. But I also thought this would be one that, like a slasher film that you would probably enjoy. And I'm happy I actually recommended this one because, well, not recommended, but suggested this one. Because like rewatching it, there's a lot of stuff I either forgot about since the last time I've seen it, which it's been ages, or I just didn't pick up on. But I will say that this one is, in my opinion, kind of one of the, it's not lesser known, but I feel like with this particular franchise, fans tend to like the latter or later movies. Like, I feel like your average Friday the 13th fan is going to say start at number 4 unless they're super fans, and then they're just going to say, like, watch all of them. And you said, and I guess we'll start off with that, you said you had a bunch of questions.
So first off, listeners, this is my first time seeing this movie, despite having a macabre interest. I've never really, explored the slasher franchise as much, and Whiskey's really gotten me into this. So my first big question I want to ask is, it's a slasher film with teens, takes place at a summer camp. It seems very sort of like generic slasher. So I want to know what kind of really made this particular franchise stand out among the rest of them. That was one of the big questions I really had about this movie. What made this one special?
Well, We'll do a couple questions. Like, we'll do this one first, because I also realized that I didn't get into the analytics. So this actually came out not on Friday the 13th. It came out on May 11th of 1980.
Missed marketing opportunity.
And we'll get into this as it goes on. But like, I've talked about indie films and how they can be any genre. And this was essentially an independent film. Like, it was, it was distributed by Paramount, but it was made for less than $1 million. The budget was only $550,000, but it grossed over $39 million.
Wow!
And its opening box office weekend was $5 million.
Oh my gosh!
So when you talk about printing money, this is what I'm talking about. Like, the turnaround. I mean, that's got to be like close to 1,000%, profit on this. And that's kind of the thing with the slasher genre. Part of the reason they were so ubiquitous at this period of time was because they were so cheap to make and so profitable. Like, if you made one, even if it was a steaming pile of crap, you were likely to make your money back just in the first weekend. So even if people hated it after watching it, you could kind of rob people blind. And this is sort of the model that has been continuing on lately with Blumhouse. They don't make slashers specifically, but that is their whole business model, is make it cheap and try and make it so that you make a profit opening weekend. And even if people hate it, you already got the money. And every once in a while they make like a good movie, but I feel like Jason Blum probably was a fan of this era, like business sense wise. But so you asked, like, what makes this one special? Well, one thing I almost am I don't lament it, but this is an interesting slasher franchise because I asked you, and I guess I'll ask now that we're like talking about it. Did you know what the ending was going to be? Did you know about the quote unquote twist that like a lot of people know about?
No, actually, this particular okay. So when you say the twist, there's to me there's two twists that sort of happen at the end.
Okay.
There's the reveal, obviously, that it's the mother. You know, we have sort of a reverse Psycho going on here.
Okay.
And then that was the first. Or the second one is when he pulls, she gets pulled down into the water.
Okay. So did you know about either of them,
I
or
didn't know about the mother one for some reason. I didn't know about the second one, but something about it, I was like, oh, that makes sense when I saw it. I don't know why, but like I didn't go into it consciously knowing this was going to happen because
if you see like top 10 lists of jump scares, that one is on every list because
I
it's
can see
so
that.
serene, and then all of a sudden he jumps out.
Well,
And that was essentially kind of, I think, what it was supposed to be. I think I might be making this up, but I feel like in early cuts of the movie, the whole bit with her in the hospital was added later,
yeah.
because people were like, wait, what? But I might be wrong about that.
Well, I
But
get what's
so you
funny
did know
about.
about the mother. That is kind of the thing that I'm not. I wouldn't be surprised if you had known that already. I was kind of hoping you wouldn't,
And I
because
didn't.
to me that is what makes this one special, and that is why I sort of am sad that people like the sequels more. And I get why. Like the typical slasher like killer character is, usually a hulking brute wearing a mask and
Right.
stuff. So the
I.e.
idea of it
Michael
being the mother,
Myers.
for me, like this is something people say all the time nowadays, but it really did sort of subvert your expectations. And like someone spoiled it for me before I'd seen the movie. It's kind of one of those things. There's always some smartass either in the horror community or when you're in like middle school who's like, "Oh, did you know Jason's mother was the killer in the first one?" So going into it, I knew the twist, but it's just one of those things that makes this one unique because it almost feels more original.
Yeah.
And the thing is, like, it's funny, you said it reminds you of Psycho. I'm gonna continue talking about that later, but the thing I got rewatching it now that I don't know if I picked up on last time I saw it was that this felt to me like kind of, it felt like Sean S. Cunningham, who's the director, by the way, I forgot to mention that, directed by Sean S. Cunningham. It felt like a real big fan of Psycho was
Mm-hmm.
trying to copy Halloween. That's what it felt like, because you had all of the tropes. You haven't seen Halloween, but it is essentially exactly like this movie, except it takes place in a suburban area instead
Yeah.
of a summer camp. But it's the same kind of thing where you don't really, the killer is out there, but the whole movie is essentially like a bunch of kids and teens and stuff going about their business on Halloween while he slowly picks off different characters.
Well, you know what's
And it's got the same
interesting?
kind of vibe. It's not super overtly violent or anything.
Yeah.
It's all very much like suspense, and then the kill happens, but it's not like super graphic or anything.
Well, and what
This
makes it,
one, this one was a little more graphic than Halloween, honestly.
but it was less graphic than I was expecting.
Oh yeah, that's another thing with this whole era. Like we've talked a little bit. I don't know if we've really mentioned it too much on the show, but like one thing that's kind of funny looking back at Siskel and Ebert is they would almost like hate movies on a moral basis if they thought that like they had something morally wrong. Like we talked about Blue Velvet, not on the show,
Yeah.
but how Roger Ebert, Siskel liked the movie, but Ebert thought it was like depraved, and it's like, how could you put this actress through that? And the actress was saying, I mean, we were acting. Dennis Hopper was super nice to me. Yeah, and this is a thing in college I took a horror class because that's my favorite genre, and Ebert kept coming up a lot because a lot of these like horror movies that are considered classics or at least popular by today's standards, he hated them always. He thought they were like disintegrating the fabric of society or whatever, and he hated the Friday the 13th series. Him and Siskel hated it too every year, because that was the thing about Friday the 13th. This was so cheap and easy to make, they made one a year for almost a decade. And
That's great.
every year they would talk about how it's disgusting and they hated it, and it was sort of like almost a dirty secret with like they hated making the movies, but they kept making them money. So they almost begrudgingly would make a Friday the 13th movie every year, just knowing, oh, everyone thinks we're creating serial killers, but it's
I mean,
making
they're
us a
not.
ton of money.
At most, what's happening is people are just desensitized to seeing it, but that a serial killer does not make at
It's
all.
a tale as old as time. When the printing press was invented, the church said that it was going to make people Satanists. When television was invented, it's people said it was going to brainwash them. When movies, even in like the 20s, were making like gangster movies, it's like, oh, it's going to create criminals. Recently, like when we were growing up, it's, oh, Mortal Kombat is going to turn people. There's never, ever, ever been a serious psychological study done that has proven anything correlating violent media with people being violent.
Right? Like
And it's to
usually,
the point now where it's stupid to even make that argument because they've tried for
yeah, and it's
almost 100 years at this
usually the
point.
case the person's already disturbed and
Yeah, I
they
don't
latch
care
on
if
to the property. The property does not make them this
Yeah, I
way.
don't care if the neighborhood kid is watching Friday the 13th movies. I care if the neighborhood kid is strangling alley cats.
Right?
It's it's such a stupid thing. But so Siskel and Ebert hated these, and it was sort of part of the big moral panic. I think it was even kind of roped into the whole satanic panic. Like the 80s was like everyone was afraid of everything. Your kids are going to get kidnapped. Satanic cults are everywhere. Movies are violent and depraved and turning people into Satanists. It was everything parents could say to be like, oh, society is going down the tubes. But really, that wasn't the case. And even to this, if you liked this movie, which obviously I'll know by the end of this review, but
Right.
if you liked this, I'd say check out the rest of the series because one thing, because of that moral backlash, they were edited like anytime they finished a cut of the movie, it would have to go to like the MPAA, and if they're like, oh, this is too violent, they would cut bits of stuff out of the movie to make
Hmm.
it so that it would get an R rating. So, as much as these films have a reputation for being depraved and super violent, not by today's standards, but even from the standards then, it's like there's not really all that much blood and gore because the MPAA was like, oh, we need you to take out 10 frames of this stabbing for it to make an R rating. So it was towing the line
Yeah.
even for the decade that it came out in.
Well, like just
Um,
speaking specifically on the violence alone, because we had this one, and then we had last month we had Terminator,
oh
uh,
yeah,
but with this one, what I really appreciated about the level of, and this is always something I've kind of, me, I've struggled kind of with this myself, not necessarily from a moral standpoint, but more just because I'm like, I kind of don't want to see something like this right now. I'm good. But like for me, what I appreciated at least about this movie is it knew, and I think this has to do with the fact that they were anticipating backlash or whatever, but it's like they saved the more gruesome bits for when it would have the most impact. Like we didn't have, like I actually appreciated there were some, what I would call, and it sounds bad, but the less interesting deaths happened off screen, and like we would just find a body or somebody's body would be thrown through a window at them.
don't feel bad about it. That's just a sign I'm turning you into a fan. That is
well,
exactly what we call those deaths.
but
Less
like,
interesting.
and I appreciated, and now, so I do have to give a little disclaimer here because when I watched this, I watched the first, I think, 75% of it on in my bedroom upstairs, and I go in my child at home, and all I have is like a 12-inch black and white. So maybe some of that toned some of it down, but even then, it was like it and I think you guys said the director's name. His name is Sean something, right?
Sean S. Cunningham.
Sean S. Cunningham. I want to like applaud him for, because I feel like it's something that a lot of, when they try to make slash movies nowadays, they don't fully understand that there is a delicate balance between just everything and finding the most where it had the most effect. And Sean S. Cunningham, for whatever he was told or whatever he did a great job finding the where to put things, when to show things, when not to show things, giving us just enough so that we can imagine what happened off screen to these other people. Like one of my favorites, oh, now I'm saying this like these weird people on YouTube. My favorite kill, but I guess my favorite kill in this movie was one that you think didn't even happen, because we had all this suspense, and I want to apologize because all these characters looked alike and their names got mixed up in my head.
Dude,
so,
you're not. Everyone's going to agree
I was
with
like,
you.
oh no, it's like when I watched Dunkirk and I didn't know who anybody was. I'm like, wait, who's? I thought this guy was over here. But there was one of the characters, he went to go and check on the generator. And we watch him check.
Yes.
We watch him check and fill and do everything, and you're just waiting for something to happen. And then he leaves the shed, and you're like, okay, well, I guess nothing happened. And it's not till she goes to check on him, like, oh my god, something did happen. Now, I will admit, when I saw them widen to show the back of the door, I'm like, she's gonna close it. He's in the back of the door. But until that moment, you were like, okay, he's safe. He's probably gonna run into her. It's gonna be like a jump scare that's not real, where he calls to her or something. And then, but that, to me, that was the most interesting one. And, I guess that was considered one of the more gruesome ones. He like had an arrow in his eye and other parts of his body. But I was, to me, that was the most interesting because he played with suspense. He played with our expectations, and we didn't need to see arrows being inserted into people's eyes to really get the entire effect. And so the thing about this movie that I really, really appreciated was, like I said, he knew what he was doing. He knew that he was how to play with us, and without having to just be like, and now we're going to be scooping out someone's organs, because that's fun. So I really like that about this.
Oh, for sure. And that's, I mean, honestly, maybe we'll continue with this type of genre in the future, but one of the kind of things, if you've seen a bunch of these movies, is that the hype was really fabricated by people like Ebert and the media, because a lot of these, it's overblown. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre, for instance, no one actually gets carved up with a chainsaw that you can see anyway. And with this particular series, like you got a bit of a taste of it with Nightmare on Elm Street last year, but the kills are supposed to be interesting or goofy. Like it's almost played up for kind of getting a reaction out of the audience. It's never really all as scary. It's not the same thing as watching a psychological thriller or a film about a serial killer. It's all very ridiculous. I mean, you haven't met Jason for real yet, but if you continue with this series, he becomes almost like in the same way Freddy Krueger is almost like Bugs Bunny with his like one-liners every time he kills one of the teenagers. Jason's almost like a cartoon, like brutish thug. Like all of his kills are very like slapsticky and sudden and ridiculous. There's tons. In fact, the third movie was in 3D, and so all of the kills are like capitalizing on stuff like coming out of the screen at you.
Yeah.
And almost to the point of it being funny. As soon as the shock wears away, you start laughing because of how stupid it is. And that's, again, it's not just this series. You could say that about Nightmare on Elm Street. You could say that about the later Halloween movies. You could say that sort of Texas Chainsaw Massacre is a little bit more, I wouldn't say grounded, but it's a little bit more gritty.
Yeah.
And then you've got movies like Black Christmas or My Bloody Valentine. Like the slasher genre got way off the rails, and it's partly because studios saw how profitable they were, and they all started copying each other.
Well, it's interesting that you bring up copying each other, because like I didn't do any research on this, but I rented it from Amazon, and I don't know if you know this about Amazon, but when you pause it, they'll throw up their trivia. Did you know?
Oh yes.
So one of the few things I did see was they said that the director fully admits to wanting to ride the coattails of Halloween or something. I forget exactly how it was phrased, but they say something about that. And I was like, I love that he appreciates Halloween enough to want to say that. I was like, I applaud you, sir. But
It's not. I didn't see that trivia point, but I'm not surprised. As I said, I could tell this guy must be a fan of Psycho, and it is Halloween. Like I know you haven't seen Halloween, but it is exactly the same as Halloween. And I think last time I saw this movie, I hadn't seen Halloween yet, so maybe that's why I never made that connection. But it is exactly the same tonally. It's this, even the opening, like beat for beat, it is the same. The opening of Halloween is a point of view shot of the killer killing two people or
Mm-hmm.
killing a person, and them screaming, and then stuff happens and cut to a few years later, and then it's the same thing, just teenagers going about their business wherever they are and slowly getting picked off until the ending. So
Speaking
I was
of
not surprised that he said that, because it was completely ripping off Halloween. And then there's the bits with Psycho, obviously the music.
Yes, my little brother came
Uh,
downstairs at one point. He's like, "This sounds like Psycho," and I'm like, "I think that's on purpose."
yes, and Betsy Palmer steals the show. She's the best. I love that she actually gets first billing in the credits too. She is the best thing about this movie, and I already kind of touched on it, but I honestly, I get why Jason is popular. He is kind of a fun villain in the later movies. And you can also kind of tell with this series that they had no idea where they were going. Jason doesn't even get his hockey mask until the third movie.
Yeah, and
So you can tell they have no idea where they're going.
well,
And
that's interesting. Just pausing on just that just for a minute, because like I said, I had never seen this before. I knew of Jason. I knew what he looked like. But it's interesting because I was watching. Because I'm like, like I said, I knew of him. I didn't know what he was. Like, is he a ghost? Is he the undead? Is he a real person? So I was watching this, and you were talking about the point of view of the kills and everything, and that was something I was trying to pay super close attention to when that happened, because I was trying to figure out what was going on. Like when, for example, when because I knew the story. I knew the story that Jason's character drowns and wants revenge, and that's later on. But so I didn't know that he wasn't necessarily in this one. But like at the beginning, when they were like, "Oh, well, we were just, we weren't doing it. We're honest. We were just." So I'm like, okay. So I was like, who is this? This kid clearly is somebody that they recognize or trust. Is this Jason? Did he like resurrect immediately? Because again, I didn't know what was going on. And then later when she picks up that hitchhiker, which I'll get to that in a second, but when she picks up the hitchhiker, and she's just talking with him, I'm like, clearly, okay, so it's a corporeal being. It can drive a car, and I'm like, I guess he wasn't wearing his mask, because she's just reacting like it was a normal person. And then later when the guy, I guess, that runs the camp, he shows up. Hey, what are you doing out this? I'm like, okay, wait, is it a shapeshifter? Did it shift into its child form because he was talking to it like as though it was a kid wandering out there? And so I was trying to put all these pieces together when I was watching the movie, and that's another thing that I really liked about this.
I thought you said you knew that it was his mother the whole time.
I did not know it was his mother. That's the one I didn't know.
So both of the twists you didn't know
Yes,
about.
if I said it, I'm sorry.
Okay.
I didn't know either of the twists. Once she showed up in her car and she said her last name is Voorhees, I'm like, something's up. But
so
up until then, I didn't know about that. I didn't know about either of the twists. So like I said, I was just trying to figure out what was going on, and that's another thing that I really like. They put clues in there that once you get to the end, you can play them back and be like, oh, that makes sense. At the beginning, they were reacting as though that was a staff member, because she was. Oh, now he's reacting because he knows this woman and has worked with her. Okay. Oh, over here, she's reacting normally because it's just an old lady in a car. So it was interesting to be able to play it back and and put all the pieces together, and then also, like I said, it was fun to try to just piece it together as it was going and be like, what's going on? Is it a shapeshifter? Is it a ghost? What is it?
Well, and so yeah, the series, as I said, it didn't really know what it was going to be. It knew it wanted to copy Halloween. Obviously, Cunningham had the idea of her being the killer because he likes Psycho, obviously, and that was the thing. But part of the reason I like this one a lot is because of it being different from all the other slasher movies. And all the other ones, it's pretty much straightforward. You know who the killer is. It's always based on some kind of urban legend. You get that with Halloween. You get that with this, where
you mean
that's
like
also kind of where the title
calls?
comes from. Exactly. It's always like from some urban legend, like, oh, did you hear about the old man who blah blah blah, or did you hear about the kid who drowned? Like all of these slasher movies, whether it's Nightmare or this or Halloween or any of them, it always kind of comes. It's part of the genre. It's like you invent. And Candyman is coming out soon, the remake of that, and there's that too. It's like, oh, the man who gave out candy and was unjustly killed by the police in the new one and stuff like that.
Do you know how upset I was
ghost.
to find out that the Candyman wasn't about the actual Candyman in Houston? I was so upset.
Ha. Well, anyway, so that's kind of the thing. But what I like about this one is that it is Mrs. Voorhees.
Hmm.
As Betsy Palmer kills it, and part of me, I feel like if any of you Friday the 13th fans out there hear this, you'll probably get mad, but sometimes I actually wonder what if they had rolled with her as the killer, because the thing about Jason is he always like dies at the end, and they always bring him back with some BS excuse. Oh, he was resurrected, or oh, he didn't really die. So if you're saying like, oh, Mrs. Voorhees got decapitated, who cares? Worse happened to Jason in the sequels, and he kept coming back. So I always kind of thought it'd be cool, and very unique. It would have kind of added a twist to this one, where because I don't think there were any women slashers. So if it was Jason's mom, like the vengeful, overprotective mother killing these teens, in an alternate universe, because again, they were writing these scripts as they came. It was like, they didn't plan any of these out. It's like,
Right.
oh, it did well. I guess we need to write the next one. So whoever wrote the second movie decided to go with Jason as the monster. But if they had gone the other way and just come up with a reason to bring her back, I actually think that would have been more interesting than just having
I
basically a ripoff of Michael Myers from Halloween. And I know that's going to make a lot of people angry, but
I really think that Mrs. Voorhees as the killer would be more interesting, and it's much easier for her to, because of who she is and how she looks, it's much easier for her to assimilate into different settings. And she's like, I don't want to do this anymore, and I like that'd be interesting. She I don't, and she moves to a small town somewhere else, and then they launch a summer camp, and suddenly her psychosis is back, and she's killing people. Like I feel like there was a lot, like you said, there was a lot of just interesting and different things they could have done with, because at the end I was like, wow, this is kind of cool, because it almost gave like what normally would be written off as a schlocky film depth.
absolutely. And I think part of it is her performance. And
I was like, Angela
I think you
Lansbury should play this. I would love to have seen Angela Lansbury as her.
ooh, that would have been cool. Yeah, actually, Betsy Palmer is like a classic. Her credits went all the way back to the 50s, and she's actually been on some shows you like The Love Boat and Columbo. So
Yes.
you might have even seen her on television.
I'm like, I know who this person is. I was watching this like, I know who she is. I don't know where, but
I've
I know
seen her
it's
somewhere.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm glad you agree. That's part of the reason I feel like you would agree with me. But it's ridiculous if you continue to watch more of these movies. You have a different person playing Jason in every one of the movies until like the last few. In the second movie, he's wearing a burlap sack until the hockey mask is discovered. Sometimes he is. It's just there's no such thing as continuity, and they always come up with different reasons. In some of the movies, it's not even Jason, it's like a copycat killer. In I think the ninth movie, they reveal that Jason was like an alien parasite or something. They just did not care, and I think part of it was because kind of every movie was going to be the last movie.
Yeah.
In fact, the fourth movie was called Friday the 13th, The Final Chapter. And then it did so well that the next year they had Jason Returns or whatever. It's like, it's so,
When did
it's
they
so
do Jason
shameless.
Takes
But
Manhattan? Which one? When was that?
that is the eighth one, I believe. So
Okay.
that was like a decade after this movie.
And when
Like,
did he
that
team
was-
up with Freddy Krueger?
So that was Freddy versus Jason.
Oh, Freddy versus
And that's the other thing. So Sean S. Cunningham didn't really direct a lot, but he did produce. He produced a lot of the later sequels. He produced Freddy versus Jason, and he produced the recent Friday the 13th game that came out a few years ago. And I don't know if you've heard about that.
I own that game because I had a friend.
Oh,
who
have
wanted-
you played it yet?
I have not played it yet, but it's really cheap to get. And if you want to play it sometime, I would totally want to do that with you because that would be fun.
I should check it out. I didn't get it when it came out because it was really buggy. And we're not being paid by them, anyone who's listening. But
Yeah,
for
this
anyone
is
who
not
didn't know there
sponsored.
was a game, it's cool. Basically, you either play as a camper or one player plays as Jason. And if you're Jason, you want to kill the campers. And if you're the campers, you want to escape or defeat Jason. But yeah, when it came out, it was super buggy. There were a lot of glitches. There was a lot of balancing issues. A lot of people never got to play Jason. But it was a cool idea for a game. I honestly thought it'd be cool if they had different modes, like you could play as different killers in different settings and stuff. Like that would be neat. But it was like a small indie developer who
Well,
made it.
from
But
what
Sean S. Cunningham helped produce the game, so that's cool.
so you have his blessing. I mean, that's well. I'll just quickly, as far as I know, the bugs have been fixed, and like I bought it when it was on sale on the PlayStation Store, so I think I paid like $3 for it. But as far as I know, people seem to be able to play through it now. So if you ever want to play that, I'm down.
50 likes and we'll start a Twitch channel.
We'll start a Twitch channel where we'll see whoever lost the debate in last week's episode has to be the one that's being stopped.
So another thing, I wonder if you noticed, did you see the A-list celebrity who was one of the murdered campers in this movie?
No, I did not.
Kevin Bacon gets the arrow through his neck.
That was Kevin Bacon?
That was Kevin Bacon, and it might have been his first film, but it was definitely one of his first film credits.
And to clarify, that was the one where we see it go through the bed, right? And then
yes.
out of his throat. Okay, because there was
that was Kevin Bacon.
I did not recognize Kevin Bacon.
Yeah. So and these movies, partly because they have lasted so long, and also they were money makers, and I don't know, maybe actors enjoyed being in them and whatever, but they've had a couple of famous people. Just off the top of my head, the fourth movie has Corey Feldman, and Crispin Glover, I think, is in that one as well. That might have been the sixth one, but Crispin Glover, Marty McFly's dad, is also in one.
Hey, actually, because I just was looking up to see what you mentioned Betsy Palmer, and yeah, she was fantastic in this. And I literally just found this out because I was trying to see what else I would have seen her in. Apparently, Siskel hated her. He hated the fact that she was in this so much. He doxed her or tried to dox her.
What? God, the more I hear about the two of them, the more I'm kind of like, how did they become such revered critics? They were kind of, I mean, I get that part of it was they like to, sometimes they'd disagree on movies, and some of the fun was like watching them argue with each other, but they had some of the stupidest takes sometimes. Like if you go back and read some of the reviews of like classics by today's standards.
This is terrible. Yeah, he wrote in his article. He wrote in his article, Paramount's division of Gulf Western Industries, if you want to complain about the film, you can write Charles G., the chairman of this thing. They put his address. And then he says, Betsy Palmer lives in the little town of Rowton, Connecticut. I'm sure a letter to the sent general delivery there will get to her. He was trying, oh my God. Siskel, you're a monster.
That's actually pretty bad.
Well, it also apparently he got the docs wrong, thankfully. But could you imagine?
Thankfully, but geez, that's
that was in
yikes.
Print, people. That's disturbing. Hashtag, who's the real Jason here?
That's the first time I've ever heard of them doing something like that. That's actually pretty despicable. But moving on. Other notable thing. I don't know if you stayed and watched the credits, but as you could tell, if not from the fact I said that it was less than $1 million budget, it was pretty much a skeleton crew. And one kind of famous person who worked on this movie, who we mentioned a little bit, or I mentioned him in our Thing review from last year, but Tom Savini did the special effects / makeup effects for this. And he is kind of a one-man horror machine. He worked on he worked with Romero on Night of the Living, or Dawn of the Dead. He might have worked on Night of the Living Dead. I know famously he worked on Dawn of the Dead. But he wrote a book. I mentioned this in that review, but he has a book called Grand Illusions, and he's got a couple. I think it's Grand Illusions 1 and 2, but it's a book that shows you really simple tricks for doing like makeup effects, and like, ooh, I'm cutting my wrist, but really I've just got like fake blood squirting next to a razor.
Actually, I think I worked with somebody in school who'd read that book, and he helped me make fake intestines for one of my shorts.
It's he's great, and so he worked on this, and he is really cool. He's also like acted in some stuff in if you've ever heard of the movie From Dusk Till Dawn, he actually has like a small role in that. But he's a really nice guy, and he was kind of famous for working on movies like this because he always had really simple yet effective gags, as they're called in the industry, for doing stuff like that. Like, for instance, the arrow trick. obviously it's like a fake torso, and Kevin Bacon was kneeling under the bed, and so his head was sticking through a hole, and then they stabbed the arrow
Yeah.
through a fake torso and squirted blood. It was stuff that seemed really amazing at the time, but it was all just like the really simplest sort of fixes. In some of the later movies, he's got like, if you ever see Jason like machete someone in the head, it's actually them reversing the footage. So it's the actor or the stunt person holding the cutout machete to their head and then pulling it away really fast. And instead they they play the footage in reverse, and it looks like he's chopping them in the head.
Did they
so
do
just
that
really
for Mrs.
simple.
Voorhees' demise in this movie? Is that how they did that this one in this one too?
It's possible. Looking at the footage, I feel like it just was a dummy
Okay.
because it's like she's screaming, and then I feel like there was a quick cut. That's actually one of the sequences I'm not a huge fan of, and I forgot about until I watched this, but I don't know why they did the slow motion, other than I think they were trying to hide probably a less than stellar effect of her head getting chopped off.
It
But
reminded
that,
me. It reminded me of in the original Omen, when that guy's
oh
decapitated
yeah,
with the sheet of glass.
yes. Um,
It
and
reminded me a lot of that.
yes, and see, you've seen the original Omen. If you can handle that movie, you can handle any of the slasher films from the '80s. That movie was pretty brutal.
Well, yeah, especially when they're trying to climb over gates, and I was like, "Oh my god!" Yeah, there were a few times when I was watching it. I went through a kick, I think my junior year, where I was like, "Let me just see what horror films I can handle." And I know I watched that one. I think I watched Children of the Corn, which that I could have skipped over the diner scene in that one. And I think the only one I could not get through was Henry Portrait of a Serial Killer. I think I told you about this. I'm like, I got like
That one
about
is not even a slasher movie. That is probably one of the most intense things I've ever seen. So
and
if
I told a friend about this, and he was like, "Really, you can handle that? That was okay." I'm like, I don't even know how to talk to you, sir. Are you even human?
I don't know what that person. I'd keep an eye on him.
I
That
used
movie
to
didn't
room with
affect
him.
you. I mean, I love horror movies, and that movie's pretty hard to sit through. So
I was
I don't know.
I stopped. There was like one I remember, and I'm not gonna talk about it here because it was too disturbing. But there was one scene. I was like, as soon as I was on, I was like, I just stopped. I closed my computer. I'm like, I need to go outside. I just need to see sunlight. I need to see happiness. I need to see literally anything else.
Well, that is kind of a perfect like distinction between a typical '80s slasher film and a more grounded horror film, because the thing about these types of movies, again, a lot of it was shock value, and a lot of it was very bombastic and goofy and over
Mm-hmm.
the top. That movie was, at least it affected me, because it was very real. This is how a serial killer, and it was based, wasn't it based on
It was Henry Lee Lucas
exactly.
and
So
Otis
it's,
O'Toole.
yeah, so that's kind of the big distinction between a movie like that and a movie like Friday the 13th or Halloween or any of these, is that they're very ridiculous. There's usually a supernatural element. There is sort of a, I mean, the camp setting is kind of great because this is the sort of thing you would expect someone to be telling at a campfire, you
Mm-hmm.
know. And then the ski mask wearing psychopath, it's
Well,
it's it's
what I really liked about this setting is I think, and again, I'm only speaking that I've seen like other movies of only when they've been edited and been like on sci-fi or something, and I'm always just like, can you just like walk to the town? You were there 5 minutes ago, and I like how in this one they set it up as the town being far enough away that it's worth it to even hitchhike into. It's worth it to like they have to hitchhike to get from the town to there. It's like it's that far. And then I think when the guy's coming back into the thing, it's like it's too far for like even, oh no, one of the campers, it was too far for them to even be driven all the way there. They had to like walk half the way because the guy was like, I'm not driving all the way or something. So I really did like, though, they did establish, they kind of took out that question of, girl, just walk to town, like seriously.
For sure. I
They
actually
did take
think
it
that
out.
the truck. I think that guy was like superstitious. I think he didn't want to go there.
Right.
But you're right, and that actually helps. Again, you haven't seen Halloween, but part of what made that scary was that the killer was there, but no one was aware of it, and it was Halloween, so it was kind of in a time when he could mask his behavior a little bit, because
Yeah.
you come across a real dead body on Halloween, and it's like, is it a decoration? Is this real? So like there was kind of a bit of dramatic irony in Halloween, because
Well, which that
he
has
was
happened in real life. People have accidentally hung themselves, and people didn't realize till like 2 days later. Oh, it's not a decoration.
exactly, and that is kind of an important thing in these movies to suspend people's disbelief. Again, Night on Elm Street. He's attacking them in their dreams, so there's some plausible deniability there. Like, oh, you were just dreaming. In this, you're in a very uh, distant location, cut off from everyone else. On Halloween, it happens on Halloween, so there is
Yeah.
a
So
way.
there's a reason why it's not just they picked here because oh interesting. There's actual reasoning and justification for the setting or the time of day.
Exactly,
or the
and
time of
even
year.
in Jason Takes Manhattan, apparently I haven't seen that one. My reputation with these movies is a little spotty. I've seen the first three, and then I've seen other ones like out of order. But in that one, most like 50 minutes of the movie is him getting to Manhattan. So he's not even in the city for very long. They had to explain, how did Jason Voorhees get to Manhattan?
And why does he hate Manhattan people?
Why is he here?
Well, you know, I mean,
So apparently,
well, one of the things I wanted to ask is so, and apparently this is, from my understanding, an aspect of the '80s slasher genre. They make the teens so unlikable. Like, I'm just like, I was just in here watching this. I'm like, is this how teens were in the '80s, or is this what an adult who was losing control of his teenage children thought that they talked and acted like? Like, I maybe this is just a me thing. I don't know anyone who would go to work at a camp and then want to be like, oh, okay, we have a few days till the kids arrive. Let's play strip Monopoly. There's just,
right?
I'm just like, I just want to know why that's a thing in the slasher genre, why they write them like this.
Well, it's so that you don't really feel as bad when they get hacked to bits. This one is actually, and I'm glad. I knew I had more to talk about, but I guess I should have written more notes. I think I was running out of paper. But so this touches on one other kind of notable misunderstanding about the genre. Is it's like, oh, don't go have sex or you'll die, and that's not really true in any case but this movie. And there's a reason behind that, because the whole point is that Jason died because they were too busy having sex to save him from drowning.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not like in other slasher movies, oh, don't have sex or else the guy's going to kill you. In this one, it's almost like a trigger. Like, it makes Jason angry because he remembers, oh, I drowned because people were doing this. And you haven't really met Jason, but there's like a childish simplicity to the way his brain works. Like, he's very almost like lizard brained about the way he does things, and so that's the thing. It's not that that's a trope of the slasher genre. That's like a trope of this specific series because it pisses him off that they're having sex.
Yeah.
Well, and that's the other thing I wanted to touch on that makes, I like this movie because I like Mrs. Voorhees, but I do like the Friday the 13th series as a whole, because Jason, unlike a lot of slasher villains, there is a pretty good argument for him being pretty sympathetic, because they didn't exactly get into it in this movie, but it gets worse, like, because they elaborate his character a little bit. Like, you see him without a mask sometimes and stuff. Like, it's very heavily implied that he might have been kind of special needs.
Okay.
And it is
no.
explicitly implied that he was getting bullied, and when he drowned, he got like pushed into the lake. So it's like he was getting bullied and the counselors didn't do anything, and they were too busy like macking on each other to like save him. So it's unlike, Freddy Krueger, who's like a child murderer, or Michael Myers, who is basically a psychopath. He might not be attacking the right people, because it's always different counselors or even people vacationing up at Crystal Lake that he's going after. But he has a right to be very angry, and he's probably the only slasher or killer I can think of that's like that. You know what I mean? and they kind of play that up. You haven't seen Freddy versus Jason, but the thing about any of those versus movies is you kind of have to pick one of the monsters to be sort of the unofficial hero. And in that movie, they made it Jason because, you know, between him and Freddy, it's kind of no contest. One of them
Yeah.
kills children, and the other one was like bullied until he drowned. So, you know, but
Well,
that's kind of an interesting thing with Jason that I don't think they ever really replicated with any other of the
but yeah,
movies.
and actually, I'm trying to think of like all these other slashers, and they, for the most part, are just people who are, for the most part, psychopathic or disturbed, or it's never for, and I could be wrong, so don't nobody like crucify me for this, but from what I know of them, they really don't have anything that you'd consider a legitimate complaint. Like,
No.
especially, and as we should talk about, oh, it gets worse with Jason. We find out, oh, he should have been supervised the whole time because he was special needs. Oh, he was also being bullied, and the campers didn't. I'm not saying the answer is to go and run around with a machete and start slashing people, but I could see how a person would get there from from one of the other
No,
ones.
it's you're not wrong for, and that, again, it's kind of people don't react when you react to emotionally to a movie. It's not always logical, you know. It's why you have kind of problematic movies, is because people, it's like, oh, I know that this character isn't necessarily a perfect person, but they really appeal to me because of something that happened to me, and that's kind of appropriate for Jason too, because like in all of these movies, you see all these counselors or people wilding out, getting really like frisky with each other, and most of
As
the time they're
one
very
does at work.
obnoxious. Yeah, and they're very obnoxious, and they're, you know, so no one is actually thinking, oh, these people deserve to die. And this even goes back, and I'm sure you're going to agree with me. There's always kind of an argument for the first slasher movie. The one that popularized it undoubtedly was Halloween. It
Yeah.
was not the first slasher, but it was sort of the, you know, we were talking about disaster films not too long ago, and Halloween was sort of the Poseidon Adventure for slasher movies. It didn't do it first, but it made a ton of money, and everyone copied it afterwards.
Yeah.
But a lot of people think like Black Christmas is probably the first slasher movie. I am going to say and I bet you'll agree with me. I think the first slasher movie was Psycho. And I
Oh
actually
yeah.
bet Sean S. Cunningham probably agrees with me. The
I
kill count is low in Psycho,
It's
but if you
low,
really,
but it's portrayal of the violence. It's the way that the way that it's, and obviously most famous example is the shower scene, and I mean, and that scene is so iconic in just film history that, you know, and you know this, I collect Madame Alexander dolls. They have one of one in the shower, and the shower curtain has the shadow on it. Like, that's how iconic this is. But because of that scene and the fact that it, for the time, it's unabashed portrayal of violence, and the fact that people just keep I would agree. Yeah, that is most definitely like the first
well,
slasher film.
well, for me, it goes even deeper. It's a deep cut here. I'm gonna go into like the slasher
Oh,
tropes
careful! Make
too,
sure you have some
because if you
band-aids
think
on
about
hand.
it, so the other thing slashers all have in common is interesting kills. Now, the kill count in Psycho is small, right?
Hmm.
But both of them are very interesting. You've got the shower scene, which is super, you know, famous.
Hmm.
But also, who's the other person who gets killed? It's the
The
private
detect.
investigator with the cool stare shot, right?
Yeah, with
So
the
they might
weird
not have been
mother who
super.
comes. Well, the guy dresses his
Exactly.
mother.
So it might not be as bloody as the '80s slashers, but already you've got the interesting kills. Now, what's the other thing that slashers have in common? Well, the people who die are
Um,
quote unquote bad people.
yeah,
Now, Marion Crane, I don't think deserved to die, but how is she framed in the first half of the movie? She's
as a
stealing money
yeah,
from her
she's
job,
embezzling.
right?
Yeah.
Exactly. And same thing with the PI. He is not a cop. He's hired privately, and he's also like harassing family members, like who when he doesn't believe them and stuff. He's very uh, pushy, and he's kind of rude. So again, it's not like he deserved to die, but the way they characterize him, you don't feel quite as bad for him when he does
Right,
die. And
and
then you've got the couple at the end who survives, and they're likable. They care about Marion. They're looking for her,
yeah,
and they're, you know, much more likable.
you
So
and I think, and
it's got
I think, and actually, the way you described it, I didn't mean to interrupt, but I think just based on that's been kind of like one of my issues with that I have with, and ironically, by this logic, I should like slasher films more, but that's always been kind of like my problems with certain films like Terminator that we discussed previously, is people who don't deserve it get it. But it's interesting, as you point out, slasher films, that's not the case. And I'm not saying people deserve it, but I'm not like, oh my god, this poor guy had a family and everything. That's not your first thought. You're just like, oh, he was kind of annoying, so I'm glad that's over.
Well, and it's not even just like I touched on it. You don't get it so much in this movie, but especially in the later ones. The kills have a comedic effect to them too. Like, so if you continue to watch these sequels, or if you go back to Nightmare on Elm Street or any of these, like, the kills not only are interesting and they're, done to quote unquote people who deserve it, based on the way the movie's written, but they're also very silly. So it's kind of hard. It sort of deflates any of the seriousness of someone getting murdered when, I don't know, like they're having a diarrhea attack from enchiladas or something. Oh my god!
Like that. Is that actually exactly in a slasher
film? They get
film?
ridiculous. Like there's that one was in a Friday the 13th movie. There was also one where it's like, a guy is too busy listening to music on his headphones to hear his buddy getting murdered, and then when Jason comes up to get him, he like takes off his headphones and stabs him in the ears. So there's like kind of an irony to that too, where it's like he gets it in the thing that he wasn't paying attention to. So it's, again, it can be pretty violent and stuff, but there's always sort of a comedic angle to it. And also when the guy gets stabbed in the ear, you're already kind of frustrated at him for not noticing his buddies getting murdered behind him.
At that point, you're just like, see, this is why you listen to people.
Exactly.
I was thinking back, and the only kill in the movie that I would consider, and it didn't affect me in the moment, I'm just thinking about it now, that I would consider, I guess, just kind of sad, unless I missed something, and it's totally possible that I did, was what's his face, the guy who's running the camp.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, this is probably, it's frustrating because I like this one a lot, but I get why it's forgotten a lot, because it's kind of the weakest one as far as memorable characters, and also because it's not it's not a proven franchise yet. It's still figuring itself out.
I would disagree with you. I would actually say this is a proven franchise. I mean,
no, I just mean
when I was in third grade, and I actually thought about this. I was like, "What? I want to see if this kid's even still alive or whatever." But this kid was over sitting we were at lunch in third grade, and this kid's telling us what's happening in this Friday the 13th movie that he saw last night. I'm like, "Why are your parents letting you watch this?"
Well, I mean, at the time, this was the first movie, and I'm not talking about slashers in general. I'm talking about when this came out. It was the first one, and it wasn't proven yet.
Oh, obviously, okay, that's what you meant.
Money. That's what I mean. It hadn't proven itself, and it also didn't. By the sixth Friday the 13th movie, there were specific things that you knew about the movie or expected from it. Oh, when's Jason going to show up? Oh, is he usually at some point near the end gets his mask knocked off and his face gets more weird looking every one. In
this one, he looked like a burn victim when he shows up for that brief second.
I think it was supposed to be like his body was decomposing under the water.
Oh, okay.
And that too, it never really fully explains why he's always back in every movie, but he's kind of he's sort of undead.
He's made of liquid metal. He can't
pretty
die.
Much. Ooh, and there was another thing I was thinking. You know what is kind of interesting? I'm not the one who figured this out, but I heard it somewhere, and it's kind of true. I know you're a big fan of the Creature from the Black Lagoon movies. And in a way, Jason sort of is the lake monster of the 80s.
He just wants people to watch him. That's all he wants.
He just wishes that they wouldn't have sex so he wouldn't have drowned.
Without him.
But he is a lake. He comes from a lake.
Yeah.
And, supposedly he is under the water, and he, seeks revenge.
I
So
mean,
I thought you'd appreciate that.
yeah, but if you think about it, I think you're right. He really is sort of just like the creature from the Black Lagoon. He essentially, and maybe it's a little bit of a stretch. I think it is a little bit of a stretch, especially even this first
It
movie.
is.
He just wants people to be responsible. He's like Smokey the Bear, but like for watching your campers.
Only you can prevent premarital sex.
Exactly.
Oh, I feel like for a second I remembered something I was
Well,
going to talk about. But did you have?
I had some more
let me know
questions.
when we hit all of your questions.
So speaking specifically about the ending and that famous jump scare, that was like I think in my opinion the most obvious setup for a sequel ever. Did they know at the time that they were going to get a sequel, or is that supposed to just leave some lingering sort of fright in there?
I think it was supposed to leave some lingering fright, but I think it was kind of a style at the time and you see this with like failed movies from different eras where they tried to sequel bait and then a sequel never came.
Mm-hmm.
So I think they were doing that hopefully, because I think by that time Halloween 2 had come out. So I think by that, they knew that it was something that could potentially make money.
Okay.
So I think it was kind of to be like a scary thing to leave at the end of the movie, but I do think that they were hoping to make. I can guarantee you, Paramount was hoping to get sequels.
Yeah,
because they wanted that money.
they wanted that sweet blood-soaked cash.
Oh yeah.
And it's another thing about the ending, and this is funny. This is actually, I think this is why this is great at this that it had that scene in it, is because so her character's also thinking, if I go out to the center of the lake, I can see anything that's coming, and I'm the only one in this boat. And I remember I actually said out loud, "Girl, this is smart. You should have done this from the beginning." And then weird zombie creature pops out of the water.
Oh boy.
It was like the movie was listening to me.
I wish I had been in the room. I bet you audibly screamed when that happened.
I didn't scream, but I was like, there was some shock to me because I was not expecting that. But then it's like after it happened, I was like, yeah, I guess I had that coming.
Oh my gosh. Well, I did remember what I was going to say. This is more of like a fun fact, but so they got kind of creative. I do think the score was a bit of a rip-off of Psycho, but one kind of continuing thing that they have in all of the sequels, I don't know if you noticed, but anytime Jason's mom was about to kill someone, there was that little sound effect, that
yes.
So that was actually, so the composer had this kind of fun idea where what that is actually an echo effect on the consonants of killer mommy.
Really?
Killer. Yeah, so it's from kill and from mommy.
Oh my god, I actually didn't realize that. That's pretty.
Yeah.
That's some great subliminal, music right there. Because
Exactly,
I was watching this and my mom was like, only thing I remember about this movie is that it is basically what you just said, that she was like, and so because I watched the last part on our TV in our living room, and she was like, she's like, someone's about to die, aren't they? And I'm like, yeah, I think so. So there was that, and then and then there was another sheet you remembered, and it was when she was trying to escape from Mrs. Voorhees, that she figures out that she's not all there. And she gets the truck, there's that dead body in there, and she runs, and the guy falls out of the tree, and I think there's a third one. She's like, is she running around and finding all the dead bodies? Yeah, Mom, that's what she's doing. Because she told me this is a movie that that when it came out, she said she had dates that wanted to take her to see this movie, and she was like, no, I don't want to see a slasher film. And she said, so one of her dates actually went ahead and bought the tickets after she told him no and tried to take her anyway. And she was like, I'm just gonna go have some enchiladas somewhere else. You go watch that. And then she said she finally did watch it later because she knew it was a movie that was like culturally significant. So she waited until it came out on TV to watch it. So she was able to kind of discuss with me later some of the things about it. But she said, yeah, the big thing that she remembers was that score. And then she was like, the fact that also that he wasn't in this movie. And then she was like, actually, and then she was like, I don't even think he has the ski mask in the second one. I think he has like a paper bag or something, which found out was the burlap sack.
It's a burlap sack, but yeah. But yeah, so that was it, and it's funny. My dad used to do that even before I saw the movie, and I didn't understand the reference. It's like if we were like outside in the dark and one of us was leaving, he'd be like, and I'm like, I didn't understand it until I saw the movie, and I was like, oh, okay, that's what he was doing.
So, do you come from a family of horror fans?
No, I don't think my mom was ever a big fan.
Okay.
My dad, it's funny, his favorite is he's a sucker for 3D. So he saw Friday the 13th 3 in theaters because of the 3D effect. And to this day, it's his favorite one. And just because of the 3D effect, like he'll buy the stupidest movies. He's like one of the only people who, well, I don't know, he was popular, but he's got a 3D TV and he's got the glasses, and I swear he bought some garbage movie called Parasite, not the critically acclaimed one, but like some 70s like 3D monster movie.
Oh, come on.
And he got it just because he read that it had like a really good 3D effect.
I mean, I'm always a sucker for Jaws 3D. You know, Jaws at SeaWorld. And then exploding shark parts that fly at your face. Who wouldn't want that?
I would be if the shark looked like, I know the shark doesn't look real in any of them, but I feel like that was the one that even more so than Jaws 4, I feel like Jaws 3 had the worst looking shark effect. Well, it literally looked like a JPEG that they had floating. And
I just remember because I have only seen it when they've done like Jaws marathons, and they just show all of them because they kind of have to. And I always the final one that they blow up the shark and it's like cartoon jaw pieces fly at the screen and then stick there for a minute, and I'm just like, people were scared of this.
Right. Well, no, actually, I think people hated that one because of how bad it looked.
That one,
I
that
liked
one
the
at least.
Setting.
Well, I think that one, if I remember correctly, and because I was not alive then, I can only go by what my mother tells me, because she was the one that worked in theaters for like ever, and she says that one was kind of when people were like, okay, the franchise has lost its steam, but she said no one thought it was bad until Jaws: The Revenge, and she says that's when Michael Caine got the nickname Anything for a Buck Caine, because he showed up in that one, and he'd been in he was in so many, I think, bad movies at the time. That he's kind of just got that reputation of just taking any job that would pay.
I like the second Jaws movie, but the third one is just too cheap looking for me. I like the setting. I think that's kind of neat, but I don't know.
I think that's why I like that one too. I think the setting was kind of just different. It was interesting. And for some reason, the second one, I just remember being like, okay, so it's just some teens stuck on a boat, and...
But so are there any other questions you had about the movie?
We've answered most of my questions, you know. Oh, I'm sorry. I want your clarification on the ending. So, because we talked about if it was a sequel bait or not. Yes. So that still raises the question though, even if it was sequel bait, was that a nightmare she had, or did that actually happen?
Okay, so I can, just based on if I care about the sequels, then it wasn't a nightmare. But if it were like its own movie and I was trying to, I would think that it was, you know, her having a traumatic nightmare or whatever. But just based on what would come later, I don't think so, even though it doesn't really make sense that Jason didn't age for like 30 years and then all of a sudden he's like a full-grown adult. I think the sequel takes place like 3 years after the first one, even though it came out a year later. And Jason's like a full-grown adult, so that doesn't make sense. But again, these movies, you can't even take them fully seriously because the continuity doesn't make sense. I will say, like, so... I don't know, hopefully this won't spoil you from like watching some of the sequels, but in the second one, Jason's like worshiping the severed head of his mother, and it looks
as one does.
First off, it does not look like Betsy Palmer's head, and it also looks like it's like decomposed like a lot, which again, if it was 3 years, then maybe that makes sense, but the hair is really long. It just, again, the continuity, you can't really take these movies very seriously because they don't even really seem to care about each other. It's almost like each it was each written by a different person who'd never seen any of the others.
Well,
Like that's what each sequel feels
well, I
like.
will say though, even if that is the case, it is an ending that got me thinking. And so I went back and forth for like a day, and I was like, okay, what happened? And I think I finally decided on it actually happened, not because of the sequels, but because there's actually a line in it. When she wakes up in the hospital, and you know, and she's like, and that's what at first that's like, oh, was it a dream? But one of the cops that shows up said, when we found you, I think he said floating in the lake, we thought you were dead too. Oh no, oh
Yup.
wait, he says when we pulled you from the lake. And so I'm like, that's a weird way to phrase it if you were like when we brought your boat in from the shore. Like when you talk about pulling someone from a lake, that's usually the way you describe finding a body. That's just been
Yup.
floating there. So that's my only so I that because of that line in particular, I think I finally decided on it actually happened, and it just happened to be when, of course, in true Friday the 13th fashion, no one was looking, even though everyone had just showed up at that point.
So again, I think that Paramount wanted a sequel, but if I'm assuming Sean S. Cunningham is a, you know, artistic director who wanted this to kind of be his standalone masterpiece, I think it was sort of like that campfire scary story ending where it's like, you know, like the hook hanging from the car door or whatever, you know, like, oh, did it happen or didn't it happen kind of thing.
Yeah.
You know, because there's also the final line is like he's still out there, and then you've got the cross dissolve with her face over the lake. So
Yeah.
I feel like it was supposed to kind of have that spooky campfire story sort of ending where it's like, ooh, maybe Jason is out there and he's going to kill again. You know, even though the logical explanation is, oh, the mother did it, it's like, oh, maybe he was channeling her mother and she wasn't crazy. Maybe that was like him
Like
reaching
possessing
out
her
to her or
or like
something. You know?
telepathically getting her to do stuff.
I mean, if you take the sequels into account, that might be what was happening because he is a supernatural being, and as we see in the sequels, he was alive or undead at the time. So maybe that was him like using her body or something. We don't know.
So I'm speaking just strictly from like if this was a standalone movie. I think it happened because of what I just said, not because he shows up again.
There you go.
But then again, but even if that did happen for that reason, then that still leaves, like you said, the campfire ending of something is still out there at Camp Crystal Lake.
So, how did you? So I guess we're at that time where it's like, did you like it? Did you not like it? Obviously, it's a recommend from me. I kind of wish all of you Friday fans out there liked this movie more. I understand why you don't, but it's one of my favorites. I definitely think the twist ending is kind of fun. In an alternate universe, I wish that Mrs. Voorhees went on to be the killer in all of the sequels, but what can you do?
Or at
but
least she showed up
it?
like it went, or at least if it went back and forth. So this is a recommend from me. This is a movie. You know, it's not my normal cup of tea, but it is definitely a movie that I did enjoy. I'm so
pleased with.
Here's like I'm so pleased with myself.
I'm so pleased with myself because I had a feeling you were going to like this one. Partly because that's the other thing with Betsy Palmer is she's such a classic Hollywood actress that I figured you might like her kind of theatrical performance of Mrs. Voorhees.
I love
so I figured that might appeal to you.
I love that. To me, like what makes this movie stand out, even though I asked that question at the beginning, you know, I had my own ideas of why this one stood out, and unfortunately, as we found out, it's not present in the sequels. But I really did appreciate having a character, a villain, so to speak, who had actual problems and reasons that you can kind of get on board with, and I liked the fact that the killer was a woman.
Dude, it's got that girl boss energy. Like I said, all the other slashers were big burly dudes.
It does, but
skinny,
also,
creepy dudes if you're talking about Freddy, but you got Mrs. Voorhees.
And in the fact that she's also a person who was affected by a tragedy, and it gives her character depth, it gives the story depth, it gives her reasoning, because, you know, one is she's avenging Jason, two, she's in her own mind protecting future campers from these people. I'm not saying that they would turn out to be like, although with strip monopoly, we don't know. But I really like that she had depth. I do think that maybe, it is, I will say it is a very sort of bare bones movie. It's pretty much just the plot. And so I know that bothers some people, so they may not like it for this. At first, I thought that bothered me, but then I kind of appreciated it because I really got to sort of focus on what mattered. And I think the same thing, and I like this. It's not, I wouldn't call it sensitivity the way that we think of sensitivity now, but I do appreciate that the use of violence was used with discretion and at appropriate times. Like, it's not this, I wouldn't consider this like a bloodbath movie, so it wasn't disturbing. But yeah, there's a lot of stuff that I just like about this movie that going into it, I didn't think I was gonna like or appreciate. This obviously would not go on to like my weekly rotation of movies that I will watch like things a million times, but this is definitely one that if somebody was like, hey, they're doing a screening of Friday the 13th, I'm like, yeah, I'll go. I enjoyed that. It's definitely a recommend, and it was a surprise recommend for me because I was so sure that I was not going to like this, and I liked it. And it's one of those movies I could put on when I'm doing stuff, which...
Heck yeah.
Which to
it's
me,
also good.
To me, it's like, that's one of my issues with movies nowadays. It's like, oh, they're so involved. I can't fold lunch. And I don't mean that as a bad thing. I'm saying that as a plus to this movie is, like I said, that's one of the reasons why some people will be bothered by the fact it's a bare bones movie. And to me, that's a plus because it doesn't need the fact that she's the killer and that she wants revenge and that Jason was wrong gives it enough depth that I don't need to have everybody's side story of why she was the one that survived, or why everyone came up here. Or my big question is, why come none of these people could be dropped off at the gates? Like, seriously? No one's parents wanted to just let them like be dropped off at all.
I have no idea, but I agree. Like, again, I get why this, and I don't think this is hated by any means by horror fans or fans of this franchise. I just think it's not as celebrated as it should be. But I think it's slow paced, but I agree with you about the bare bonesness, but I agree that it's a good thing because, I mean, that's kind of a thing with movies. You don't want them to overstay their welcome, and this movie doesn't waste any time. It might be a little more slow, and the kills aren't as ridiculous as they get in the series, but just as like a cool little horror movie, it's great. And if you're a fan of the franchise, again, I think a lot of people do still like this one. I just don't think it's their favorite. But I'm different, and I kind of wish Mrs. Voorhees had gone on to be the killer, because if you think about it, Jason's not too much different from Michael Myers, except he's a little bit more sympathetic.
Yeah. So I definitely recommend from both of us then.
Heck yeah, man. It's got those summer vibes, too. This is one of the few horror movies you can watch during the summer because it's a summer camp movie.
That, and not only is it a summer camp movie, but it also helps create the theme for this month. The month of August is summer camp month. So next episode, we're going to be discussing the Wes Anderson classic, Moonrise Kingdom.
Heck yeah.
Which is basically the same thing as Friday the 13th, if you think about it. No, I'm just kidding.
But yeah, thanks for hanging out with us, you guys. If you're watching this on YouTube, feel free to like and subscribe if you're so inclined. And we really appreciate you guys hanging out with us. Until next time, stay thirsty, campers.
And don't have sex and ignore your children, especially around
Only
pools.
you can prevent premarital sex.
Exactly.
Or else Jason will get you.
Okay, bye all.
Bye, guys.
Reels on the Rocks is a production of La Prince Laboratories. It is edited and produced by Alejandro Castillo and features original artwork by Asa Esparza and original music by Pat Mars. Follow us on Twitter at Reels on the Rocks and tweet at us with any movies or topics you'd like us to discuss in the future.